The marriage proposal was supposed to mark the beginning of a new life. Years of struggle, overcoming, and unconditional love had led to this unforgettable moment. Everything seemed perfect. They made promises to themselves, dreamed big. But exactly 15 minutes after this request, a brutal and completely unexpected event transformed this day into a nightmare no one could have imagined. Lara was born into luxury. The mansion where she grew up was as grand as it was cold, filled with expensive objects but devoid of warmth. As the only child of a family obsessed with status, she spent her days surrounded by nannies, bodyguards, and a suffocating routine designed to shape her into the perfect heiress. But inside her, there was a restlessness that neither gold, nor travel, nor the most extravagant toys could satisfy. One morning, driven by a curiosity she couldn't explain, Lara found a back gate ajar. When she crossed it, her feet touched the packed dirt of the streets on the outskirts, where life pulsed in a way she had never seen before. The dust in the air, the smell of simple food, the loud laughter and vibrant voices made that world feel alarmingly real, so different from everything she had known. It was in the square, surrounded by old trees and rusty playground equipment, that her eyes met Miguel's. He was a slender boy with tousled hair and a face streaked with dirt, but he carried a vibrant, intense energy that seemed to defy hardship. While he focused on fixing a torn kite, Lara watched, hypnotized by the simplicity and lightness of the moment. Not fully understanding what drew her in, Lara stepped closer, and something invisible formed between them, a silent, inexplicable bond that would unite their destinies forever. Two completely different worlds collided in that instant, hers, filled with excess, control, and loneliness, his, defined by scarcity, resilience, and dreams as free as the kite he tried to make fly. After that encounter, Lara began to escape more frequently from her golden reality, ignoring the walls, the rules, and the expectations that always surrounded her. Her steps grew surer each time she headed to that square, where, for the first time, she experienced the freedom of simply being an ordinary child. And Miguel, who had never had much beyond his own imagination, found in her a rare companion who made his days brighter, lighter, and happier. The contrast between them was stark. While Lara arrived in clean clothes and spotless shoes, Miguel ran barefoot, his knees scraped and his shirt stained with dust. But none of those differences mattered. They completed each other in a way neither could explain, as if the pieces of a long-lost puzzle had finally come together. They played for hours, sharing the little they had. He offered his courage, his adventures, and his freedom. She brought her stories, her vivid imagination, and her endless curiosity about a world that, until then, had been denied to her. The joy they found together seemed powerful enough to silence even the sounds of the daily arguments Lara heard at home, and the hardships Miguel faced in his small world of limitations. But that bond didn't go unnoticed for long. People in the community began to comment about the well-dressed girl who always showed up at the square, while the walls of her mansion began to close in tighter, as her parents discovered their daughter was mingling with a world they believed should never be part of her life. When Lara's family finally realized how often she escaped to that place, the reaction was devastating. From that day on, the mansion was no longer just cold. It became a golden prison. Lara was isolated, forbidden from ever crossing that back gate again, while her parents did everything they could to suffocate a friendship they saw as a permanent stain on the family name. Inside her room, surrounded by expensive toys that now seemed meaningless, Lara felt for the first time the crushing weight of having no control over her own destiny. Outside, the square that once brought her joy became a distant memory, a dream that crumbled with each tear falling on her satin pillow. Meanwhile, on the other side of the walls, Miguel went to the square every day. He sat on the same bench, looking toward the spot where Lara used to appear, always smiling, always running, as if the whole world fit into that space between them. As the days passed, her absence turned into silence, and then into a hollow nothingness that was hard to fill. Even at such a young age, Miguel came to a cruel understanding of how the world was drawn with lines that separated people not by what they felt, but by what they had. And in that painful realization, a mix of longing and revolt was born within him. A certainty that, despite everything, that would not be the end of the story already written in their shared destiny. Time, relentless, continued its course. Years passed, and both Lara and Miguel were forced to grow up, each within the limitations imposed by their respective worlds. She, suffocated by a routine of obligations, etiquette, and family expectations. He, battling daily against the harshness of life in the outskirts, where every dream felt too big to fit into reality. But no matter how hard the world tried to keep them apart, there was something that neither time, nor social class, nor house walls could erase. Within each of them, the memory of those childhood days remained alive, pulsing like an invisible scar that didn't hurt but never let them forget that somewhere, there was someone who once filled their days with a kind of love money could never buy. Their reunion happened unexpectedly, years later, when 12-year-old Lara was required to participate in a school social project, ironically, in the same community where Miguel still lived. The moment she stepped off the bus, her eyes met his, and everything that had been dormant returned with overwhelming force. In that moment, class, clothing, and reality no longer mattered. There was only the living memory of everything they had once shared. And above all, the silent confirmation that their connection had never been childish, fleeting, or naive. It was the beginning of something far deeper, far stronger, far more destined than anything they could have imagined. The reunion that should have been just a childhood memory sparked something much stronger inside Lara and Miguel. They were no longer children running around the square, but teenagers who, even without fully understanding it, felt each other in a new, deeper, almost inevitable way. What had once been companionship now carried lingering glances, hidden sighs, and an urgent desire to be near each other, even if the whole world seemed to conspire against it. As their meetings through the social project became more frequent, Lara realized that the once innocent feeling now made her heart race in an entirely new way. And Miguel, even carrying within himself the scars of earlier rejection, could no longer ignore her presence, which seemed to light up even the grayest of his days. The affection born in childhood had transformed into love, a silent love, yet so powerful it overflowed in gestures, in glances, and in small acts of care. Behind the simplicity of their reunions, there was a constant, almost suffocating tension. Both knew, without having to say it, that their love would not be accepted. The differences once overlooked in childhood games had now become glaring barriers, reinforced by judgmental stares, malicious comments, and the cruel rigidity of a world that separates people not by what they feel, but by what they own. Still, Lara and Miguel allowed themselves to live it. Even if in secret, even if for stolen hours between duties and lives that were never meant to intertwine. Because, for them, love wasn't just a feeling, it was an act of resistance. A daily choice to defy the impossible, knowing that at any moment, it could all come crashing down. The inevitable happened faster than they imagined. Lara's family, who had always shaped her to fit into the mold of high society, soon sensed that something was wrong. The excuses that once passed unnoticed began to raise suspicions. And one ordinary afternoon, everything was uncovered. When her parents finally confronted Lara about her absences and her forbidden love, their reaction was as violent as it was cruel. The mansion, which once felt like a castle, became a courtroom. There was no room for understanding, no space for love, no tolerance for any explanation. There were only screams, accusations, and words as sharp as knives, loaded with prejudice, wounding deeper than any physical blow could. The image of their daughter, heiress to a surname steeped in tradition, falling for a boy from the slums was seen as an unforgivable scandal. To that family, it was more than disgrace, it was betrayal. It didn't take long before Lara was threatened, pressured, and ultimately forced to make a choice: give up Miguel and return to her role as society's princess, or lose everything. But for Lara, the choice had already been made. In that moment, she realized that the love she felt for Miguel wasn't just stronger than any social convention, it was also truer than any wealth. And without looking back, she watched her life of luxury crumble, not by accident, but by decision. She would choose Miguel, even if it cost her absolutely everything. Overnight, Lara ceased to be the daughter of the mansion and became just another anonymous face in the community. Her high heels were replaced by worn flip-flops. Designer clothes gave way to simple garments, often lent by kind-hearted neighbors. The scent of expensive perfume was replaced by the aroma of strong coffee and laundry soap, now part of her mornings. The adjustment was brutal. Her first nights were filled with muffled sobs, fear, and longing for what she had left behind, but also a strange sense of freedom, almost liberating. For the first time, Lara felt she was the owner of her own life, even if that life was filled with challenges she had never imagined facing. The unpaid bills, the constant noise of the neighborhood, the suspicious glances, all of it seemed to test her every second. Miguel, in turn, split his days between heavy construction work and caring for Lara. He did everything he could to make her feel protected, even though reality was far too harsh to offer much comfort. His body bore calluses, and his wounded hands told stories of a daily struggle that never let up. Little by little, Lara began to understand that the love they shared was strong enough to weather even the fiercest storms. She learned to do nails, to braid hair, and to listen to the stories of the women at the salon who gave her a chance. And even though she missed some things from her past, she discovered that no mansion, car, or trip had ever given her what she now carried in her chest, the feeling of being, finally, free to love whomever she wanted. Their love became not just a choice, but a daily act of defiance. With every disapproving glance, every snide comment, every financial challenge, Lara and Miguel silently reaffirmed that nothing, absolutely nothing, would tear them apart. They were ready to face the world, because the world seemed determined to bring them down. The simple life demanded sacrifices Lara had never known. Waking up before dawn, standing in lines, riding overcrowded buses, feeling the raw weight of inequality. Yet at the same time, she discovered a beauty in that life that luxury had never revealed. Miguel's smile at the end of a hard day, the smell of home-cooked meals, the tight embrace that melted away all exhaustion. Miguel carried within him a mix of pride and guilt. Pride in having Lara by his side, in knowing she had chosen love over everything. But also a quiet guilt, as if, in some way, he was to blame for her having lost it all. Still, he never let it show, because he knew what they were building was worth more than any fortune. And so, through days of struggle and nights of hope, they carried on. Because despite everything, Lara and Miguel knew they were building something that neither prejudice, nor poverty, nor time could destroy. A love so rare, so pure, and so strong that it defied the very logic of a world that never wanted them together. Lara and Miguel turned a tiny room in the community into what they came to call home. The space was cramped, with peeling walls and donated furniture, but within it was something no mansion had ever offered Lara: peace. Every detail, every object carried a story, an act of kindness, a piece of the effort they both made to build a life that belonged to them alone. Challenges lurked around every corner. Money barely covered rent and food, with little left for any form of comfort. The days were long, filled with the sound of honking horns, children playing in the streets, and radios blaring from the neighbors' homes. The nights, though quieter, were filled with worries, mental math, and hopes laid on the next day. Miguel left early each morning for grueling construction work. He hauled bags of cement, laid bricks, and fought daily against the physical toll of a relentless routine. His calloused and injured hands were living proof of every battle he'd fought, of every effort made to ensure that Lara never felt she had made the wrong choice by being with him. Lara, for her part, quickly learned how to survive in a world she had never imagined living in. The delicate hands that once held only pens and fine fabrics now gripped nail clippers, files, and bottles of polish. In the small neighborhood salon, she found not only a source of income, but also a support network of women who, like her, learned every day how to survive, to resist, and, most of all, not to give up on their dreams. The simple life wasted no time in showing its harshest sides. If it wasn't the money that ran short, it was health that failed, or exhaustion that threatened to bring them down. Mounting bills, leaks in the roof during the rainy season, electrical problems. Everything seemed like a constant test of the strength behind their love. And yet, those hardships forged something neither of them knew they had: a resilience that went beyond flesh, beyond the body, beyond fatigue. They learned to find beauty in small victories, Like the first time they managed to fill the fridge or when they bought a used fan to ease the stifling heat of their nights. The disapproving stares that had long come both from the community and the people from Lara's past gradually began to lose their grip. After all, no one could deny that what they were building was real. With every obstacle they overcame, their bond grew stronger, more unbreakable. Still, there were days when the exhaustion felt nearly unbearable. Lying on their thin mattress, Miguel often stared at the ceiling, wondering if he could ever offer more. If this world was fair to people who only wanted to love and be loved. And on those same nights, Lara, watching him, knew that despite everything, she would never trade that love for any palace, any title, or any fortune. Despite the harshness of their days, the love between Lara and Miguel blossomed in ways that defied logic. In the few moments of rest, they would lie on the rooftop, staring at the stars above the city's faint glow, and dream of a life where, maybe someday, they could have a little house of their own, perhaps start a small business, maybe even build a family. Those dreams weren't grand in the world's eyes, but to them, they meant everything. Every penny saved, every small step forward, was celebrated like a great triumph. If in the past, Lara had everything material but felt empty, now, even with so little, she felt whole. Because every brick in the life they were building together was filled with love, effort, and perseverance. Miguel, though sometimes overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility, found in Lara the strength he needed to keep going. Knowing she had left a life of luxury to be by his side wasn't just a proof of love, it was a daily reminder that their love deserved to be honored, protected, nurtured. And so, even when reality tried to crush them, they pressed on. They knew the road ahead would be long, and that the world would never make things easy for those who were born with less, or who dared to love without permission. But as long as they were together, no obstacle could make them give up. Over time, the community stopped seeing them as the rich girl who gave everything up, or the boy from the slums who dared to love beyond his world. Now, they were simply Lara and Miguel, two young people who, against all odds, chose to love each other above everything else. Their love became an example, an inspiration, and even, for some, a source of envy. Because in the hardness of everyday life, they had found a kind of wealth few people would ever reach, a richness made of partnership, of devotion, of a connection so deep that not even the fiercest storms could shake it. Even when the past came knocking, as memories, as longing, or as ghosts whispering that their love was never meant to exist, they kept moving forward. Because they knew there was no force in the world capable of undoing what they had built. Every sunrise was a new chance to prove, to themselves and to the world, that they were right to choose love. And even without knowing it, destiny was already sketching the next steps in their journey. Because as they dreamed, planned, and believed that they could finally be happy, life, cruel, unpredictable, and often merciless, was preparing something that neither of them could foresee. Something that, in a matter of minutes, would change everything forever. Lara and Miguel's routine became a daily dance between love and survival. The clock seemed like a constant enemy, with days beginning before sunrise and ending long after it set. Miguel, bearing the weight of construction work on his back, faced exhausting shifts that marked not only his body but his soul. Every callus, every muscle ache, was an invisible scar from a battle he fought for the two of them. Lara, in turn, divided her time between long hours at the salon and small odd jobs around the community. She learned to make sweets to sell, to organize children's parties, and even to sew using an old machine a neighbor had lent her. Every coin earned seemed to carry far more weight than any currency from her former life of luxury. Despite the fatigue, which at times felt unbearable, a flame between them never went out. The simple act of returning home and finding each other after a long, hard day was, by itself, a powerful fuel. The tight hug at day's end, the smell of simple beans on the stove, the sound of the old TV in the background, all of it created a sense of home that no mansion, no luxury car, and no fine banquet had ever offered Lara. But even with all the love they shared, life kept testing them, as if the universe needed to be absolutely sure they were strong enough to endure it all. And with each new challenge, each fall, they rose again, more determined. Because in the end, Lara and Miguel had learned they were together not just out of love, but because of a daily choice to resist, to fight, to stand tall in the face of a world that always tried to keep them apart. The first victories, though small to anyone who never had to fight for anything, meant entire worlds to Lara and Miguel. The day they managed to buy a used refrigerator was celebrated as if they had just purchased a luxury car. Seeing food stored, fresh and protected for the first time was a win against a system that had always denied them even the basics. Another triumph came when they replaced the thin, sagging mattress with one that was firmer and more comfortable, no longer sinking in the middle or leaving them sore in the mornings. That purchase, made with months of savings, symbolized more than physical comfort. It was proof that even in hardship, they could build a life of dignity. Miguel began to gain recognition at work. His dedication, punctuality, and tireless energy caught the attention of the foreman, who started trusting him with more complex and better-paid tasks. That modest recognition filled him with pride, showing that even without a degree, a prestigious last name, or the privileges the world gave to others, he could still make a difference. Lara, meanwhile, began to shine at the salon. Her once unsteady hands now painted perfect nails and crafted intricate hairstyles. Bit by bit, her clientele grew. Women from other neighborhoods came looking for her, not just for her skill, but for the strength of her story. The girl who had once belonged to high society now held her head high, proving to the world that dignity isn't measured by a bank account, but by the courage to move forward. With the bills more balanced, Lara and Miguel allowed themselves to dream bigger. They talked, for the first time, about building a home of their own, brick by brick, in their way. No more rent, no more depending on anyone. They also dreamed of opening a small salon for Lara and maybe even a tiny workshop for Miguel, where he could escape the grueling world of construction and find more security and stability. Those plans, still far off, began to color their evening conversations as they sat on the rooftop looking toward the horizon. In their eyes, somewhere out there, the world was hiding a place where they could live with just a little more peace. Each coin added to their savings jar carried more emotional weight than any number in a bank account. Even so, the fears never fully left them. There was always the shadow of the past, the worry that somehow the world might once again find a way to tear them apart. The weight of social difference, of prejudice, of instability, was always lurking, like a storm waiting to strike at any moment. But despite those fears, there was also an unshakable conviction. They knew that if they had made it this far, they could go even further. Because in the end, they were living a life that, though difficult, was built on their own choices, on true love, and on a strength they never imagined they possessed. After so much struggle, it seemed life was finally beginning to smile upon Lara and Miguel. The salon where she worked offered her a business partnership, and Miguel received a promotion to site supervisor, with a higher salary and the promise of stability. It was as if the universe, after years of testing them, had finally decided they deserved a little relief, a little peace. Their days became lighter. For the first time, they managed to take a short trip to a nearby town. Something simple, but to them, it felt like the grandest of luxuries. Walking hand in hand on an empty beach, feeling the sea breeze, and laughing at life's little moments was, without doubt, one of the greatest victories they had ever shared. The idea of marriage, which had always been discussed in shy smiles and far-off dreams, began to take real shape. It was no longer just a wish, but a concrete plan, with dates, ideas, and growing excitement. The love that began in childhood, matured through hardship, and survived adulthood was finally about to be celebrated the way they had always dreamed. But just as love has the power to transform, life holds a cruel ability to surprise. And at the exact moment when they believed the worst was behind them, when they thought the battle had been won, fate prepared its most brutal twist. Invisible, silent, but fatal. Miguel spent days planning every detail. Although he didn't have much money, he knew the moment had to be more than special. It had to represent everything they had lived through, everything they had overcome, and most of all, everything they still dreamed of building together. He chose the lookout at the top of the hill as the setting, the same place where, as children, they had flown kites and imagined a world without limits. Every step of the plan was crafted with love. He borrowed some string lights from neighbors, picked simple flowers from around the community, and asked friends to help him set up an improvised space, humble, but full of meaning. At the center of the small lookout, he laid out photos of them throughout the years, from childhood to the present, like a timeline telling the story of a love that insisted on existing, even when everything seemed to conspire against it. The engagement ring was simple, bought with months of savings. It had no diamonds, no refined gold, but it carried something far more valuable: the weight of a story built on resistance, love, and brave choices. To Miguel, that little circle of metal wasn't just a symbol of commitment. It was proof that even in adversity, something beautiful, solid, and eternal could be created. As he adjusted the final details, his heart pounded in his chest, not from fear that she would say no, that doubt had never crossed his mind, but from the sheer magnitude of what the moment represented. It felt like their whole life, with all its highs and lows, its pains and joys, was about to be condensed into a few minutes. And for the first time, he allowed himself to truly believe they could finally live the love they had always deserved. Freely, fearlessly, with no more waiting. When Lara arrived at the lookout, led there by an excuse Miguel had carefully crafted, her eyes filled with tears instantly. The setting, simple yet deeply meaningful, reflected exactly the life they had built. There was no luxury, no extravagance, but every detail radiated love, care, and the story they had written together, day by day, against all odds. The sunset painted the sky with shades of orange, pink, and gold, as if even the universe had chosen to bless the moment. A soft breeze carried the scent of the flowers and the distant sounds of the community, weaving together their past, present, and future in a single, powerful scene. In that moment, under that sky, Lara knew once more that she had made the right decision in choosing this love, even when the whole world told her she was wrong. Miguel, kneeling before her, held the simple ring as if it were his very heart. There were no rehearsed speeches, no fancy words, only the raw truth reflected in his tear-filled eyes, the truth of a love that had been born in childhood, grown through hardship, flourished through resilience, and now sought to be sealed forever. The moment, though quiet, was deafening in its intensity. Tears streamed down Lara's face, and without needing to say a word, she made it clear that there was nothing, neither past nor future, that could ever make her want anything else. All she wanted was to walk beside Miguel for the rest of her life, facing everything as they always had. After the proposal, they stayed for hours at the lookout, sitting on the ground, holding hands, gazing at the horizon that now seemed more beautiful, more promising, more full of possibilities. They talked about the future, about their plans that now had even more shape. They spoke of the house they wanted to build, the small salon Lara hoped to open, the children they might one day have to complete their love. Night fell, and the city lights, seen from above, looked like stars reflected on the ground. Laughter, memories, sighs, and shared silences formed a perfect symphony, with no space for doubt, fear, or regret. For the first time in a long time, it felt like life was finally granting them the simple right to be happy. Miguel, though tired from his daily battles, allowed himself to dream like never before. Holding Lara in his arms, he realized that all the pain, all the sacrifices, all the no's he had received from life had led to this moment. He understood that even though the world had always said their love was impossible, they had proven, day after day, that their love was stronger than any obstacle. Lara, her head resting on Miguel's shoulder, felt a peace she had never known in all the years she lived surrounded by luxury, yet starved of love. Everything she had once been told was essential, money, status, power, now seemed so small, so irrelevant compared to the immensity of what they had built together. In that instant, all she wanted was for that love, that moment, to never end. When they decided it was time to leave the lookout, they had no idea that their walk home would carry more than just joyful memories. Miguel, ever cautious, suggested they take the main road down, safer and better lit, and Lara, excited and smiling, agreed, holding his hand tightly as if trying to make sure it would never slip away. The way back was filled with laughter, plans, and promises. The streets of the community, once the backdrop for so many hardships, now felt different, almost magical, illuminated by the happiness they carried in their hearts. Each step felt lighter, more meaningful, as if they weren't just heading home, but walking toward the future they had finally begun to paint in brighter colors. But unbeknownst to them, fate, silent and cruel, had already begun to move. Around the corner of an ordinary street, beyond anyone's control, a series of random, merciless events was starting to unfold. And in life's invisible game, they had no idea that the clock was counting down the final minutes of their love in this world. The universe, which until now had seemed to be on their side, was preparing its most brutal twist. A tragedy that would arrive so suddenly, so cruelly, it would turn all that love, all that history, all that struggle into a deafening silence, in just a matter of minutes. The walk back was filled with smiles and promises. Lara and Miguel walked hand in hand, believing this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where they could finally live the fullness of a love they had built through so much effort. The sky still held traces of sunset, now blended with the dim lights of the community flickering between old lampposts and narrow alleys. Without them noticing, a strange sound broke the night's calm. It was the screech of tires on asphalt, distant shouts, and a rising scent of gunpowder that slowly crept into the scene, subtle at first, but quickly growing deafening for those who were there. Fate, cruel and silent until now, revealed its darkest face. Around the corner, a car sped recklessly, fleeing something they would never fully understand. Maybe it was a robbery, maybe a score being settled, or maybe just the brutal randomness of life. The driver, desperate and out of control, tried to steer, but the mix of speed, panic, and recklessness made the inevitable impossible to avoid. In a matter of seconds, everything changed. The joy that filled that path shattered like glass against the pavement. The car veered onto the sidewalk without warning, striking not just two bodies, but an entire story. A love carefully built through years of struggle was crushed in a single instant. The sound of the impact was sharp, brutal, followed by a silence so absolute it didn't seem real. Lara and Miguel's bodies were thrown several meters away. The ring she had just received slipped from her finger, spinning through the air before vanishing between cracks in the concrete. The flowers from the lookout, still clutched in her hands, scattered across the blood-stained street, creating a scene as surreal as it was devastating. The driver didn't stop. He sped up, disappearing around the bend, leaving behind not just the wreckage of an accident, but the shards of an entire life violently torn apart. One by one, residents stepped out of their homes, drawn by the sound of the crash, the stench of burning rubber, and the unbearable sight that now filled the street. At first, there was only shock. For several seconds, no one moved, as if their minds refused to accept what their eyes were seeing. Then came the screams, the panic, the chaos. People rushed forward, trying to help, trying to understand, trying to deny the reality that had already become irreversible. Lara lay motionless on the asphalt, her simple dress torn, stained, soaked in blood. Her eyes, still open, gazed at the sky, as if searching for answers that would never come. Miguel, just a few meters away, was clinging to the final threads of life, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that grew weaker and weaker, as if his body, stubbornly, still tried to hold on to the love that fate had already condemned. Sirens began to sound, far away, too slow to outrun the clock of tragedy. While emergency services were being called, neighbors tried desperately to act. One lifted Lara's arm, searching for a sign of life. Another pressed on Miguel's chest, an automatic effort to keep his heart beating. But it was like fighting a merciless current, one that swept everything away without mercy. The smell of blood mixed with the scent of night, with the tears falling from familiar faces, with trembling hands clutching phones, calling ambulances, calling firefighters, calling anyone who might undo the irreversible. But life, once broken, doesn't rebuild itself. Miguel, in his final flickers of consciousness, seemed to fight against his own failing body, as if he could crawl to Lara, touch her one last time, hold her like he had promised just hours before. But not even the strength of love could overcome the force of tragedy. His body gave in. His eyes, once filled with hope, dimmed slowly, like a candle burning out to its final flicker. Lara, though unmoving, seemed to resist on the inside. Her face, once so full of life, was pale and cold, but still carried traces of the girl who, only minutes ago, was smiling, dreaming, believing. Maybe, in her final breath, she imagined the lookout, the sunset, the moment that had seemed so perfect. Maybe, in the space between life and death, she clung to the one truth that had always carried her, that she loved and was loved like few ever are. By the time the ambulances finally arrived, there was nothing more to be done. The paramedics followed protocol instinctively, performing CPR, applying defibrillators, checking vital signs, but the silence surrounding Lara and Miguel was louder, more final, and more merciless than any human effort could overcome. Miguel's body was the first to be covered with a white sheet, followed, minutes later, by Lara's. Around them, a crowd had gathered, stunned, crying, silent. The entire community, which had watched them fight, love, and resist, now fell apart alongside them. The couple who had defied everything and everyone now lay lifeless on the same street where they had once dreamed of a better future. Messages, calls, and social media posts spread like wildfire. Within minutes, the entire community, the city, and even those who had once rejected them heard the news. The love that had defied the world had not been defeated by lack of feeling, by prejudice, or by distance, but by the cruel randomness of life, which so often cares nothing for who deserves more time. On the sidewalk, forgotten among crushed flowers, the engagement ring Miguel had placed on Lara's finger earlier that very night still glistened, reflecting the faint light of an old lamppost. And maybe, in that small circle of metal, was not just a promise of love, but the proof that even though life had been cruel, not even death could erase the story they had written together. Subscribe to the channel to watch the next story that will bring tears to your eyes. See you next time.